The briefing room fell silent the moment Maya Chen stepped through the door. 12 men in desert fatigues turned toward her, their eyes dropping immediately to the National Guard patch on her shoulder. She had seen that look before. The quick assessment, the dismissal that followed. She found an empty chair against the back wall and sat without a word. The SEALs returned to their conversations, voices low, the kind of easy camaraderie that came from years of operating together. Maya opened her notebook and waited. Chief Petty Officer Morrison stood at the front of the room, a terrain map projected behind him. His call sign was Ghost, and everything about him suggested why. Lean face, eyes that tracked movement without appearing to move. When he spoke, the room obeyed. Gentlemen, we have a high-value target extraction in the Karengal Valley. Insertion at 0200. Standard 12-man element. Morrison gestured to the map, tracing routes with a laser pointer. Primary approach through the southern ridge. Compound breach here. Extraction via the northern corridor once we have the package. A hand went up from the front row. Sergeant First Class Vance, the team's sniper. Overwatch position. Morrison nodded. We have support from the guard on that. He glanced toward Maya without really seeing her. Sergeant Shun will be positioned on the eastern ridge, providing overwatch. Vance turned in his seat. The smirk was barely concealed. Weekend warrior backup. Outstanding. Laughter rippled through the room. Not everyone, but enough. Maya kept her eyes on her notebook. She had learned years ago that defending herself only made it worse. The work spoke. Everything else was noise. Morrison moved on to extraction protocols. Maya studied the terrain map, memorizing elevation changes, calculating distances, identifying the positions where an enemy sniper would naturally set up. 2 kilometers from the ridge to the valley floor. Crosswind from the east in the early morning hours. She had made harder shots in competition. She had made harder shots in combat. The briefing ended 40 minutes later. SEALs filed out in groups, discussing loadouts and contingencies. Maya rose to leave and noticed her personnel file sitting on the table near Morrison's position. The folder was thick. 3 deployments. 2 Bronze Stars. Instructor qualification from Fort Benning. National championship records that would have made any of these men pause if they had bothered to read a single page. The folder was unopened, the binding still crisp. Morrison had not even glanced at who he was trusting to watch his team. Maya picked up the terrain map printout instead. She would be on that ridge for hours before insertion. Alone, watching men who thought she was a joke walk into whatever was waiting for them in that valley. Now, wherever you're watching this from, whatever state, whatever country, you already know what this feels like. You know what it means to walk into a room and have people decide who you are before you speak. Drop your location in the comments. Military or civilian, veteran or active, we have all been in that room. We have all been the one they underestimated. Maya was halfway to the door when a voice stopped her. Sergeant Shun. Lieutenant Commander Sarah Reyes stood near the side entrance, arms crossed, watching the room empty. She was the mission coordinator, the officer who had actually assembled the support elements for this operation. Unlike Morrison, she looked at Maya like she was seeing a person. Walk with me, Reyes said. They moved into the corridor, away from the remaining SEALs. Reyes kept her voice low. I read your file. The whole thing. Maya said nothing. She had learned that silence often revealed more than questions. 3-time national champion. 2 combat deployments before this one. You qualified expert on the M110 at ranges that made the instructor ask if you were cheating. Reyes paused. You're not backup, Chun. You are insurance. Mom? Morrison is good. His team is good. But good teams walk into bad situations. When they do, I want someone on that ridge who can shoot the wings off a fly at 2 kilometers. That is you. Reyes met her eyes. I do not care what patch you wear. I care that my people come home. Maya felt something shift in her chest. Not hope exactly. Recognition. One person in this entire operation had done the basic work of reading her record. Understood, Mom. Reyes nodded. Wheels up in 6 hours. Get some rest. She walked away, leaving Maya alone in the corridor. 6 hours. In 6 hours, she would be on a ridge in the Karengal Valley, watching 12 men who thought she was a joke. Watching them through a scope that did not care about patches or prejudice or the sound of laughter in a briefing room. The rifle would speak for her. It always did. Maya returned to her quarters and began preparing her kit. The M110 lay in its case, cleaned and zeroed. 20 rounds of match-grade ammunition. Rangefinder. Wind meter. The tools of a trade she had spent 15 years mastering, while men like Vance learned her name for the first time and decided she was not worth remembering. She checked her equipment twice, then a third time, not because she doubted herself, but because doubt was a luxury that got people killed. On that ridge, there would be no room for error. No second chances, only the cold mathematics of distance and wind and the steady pressure of a trigger pull that had to be perfect. In 6 hours, she would find out if perfect was enough. The helicopter banked hard over the mountain ridge, and Ghost Morrison felt the familiar weight of command settle into his chest. 12 operators. His operators. Men he had bled with across 4 continents and more firefights than he cared to count. Tonight, they would add another mission to the list. Extract the target. Get home. Simple. He ran his eyes across the cabin. Vance checking his rifle one last time. Rodriguez adjusting his night vision mount. Daniels cracking his knuckles the way he always did before insertion. These men did not need speeches or motivation. They needed him to put them in position and trust them to execute. The crew chief held up 5 fingers. 5 minutes to drop. Ghost keyed his radio. Overwatch actual. Radio check. The response came immediately. Overwatch copies. Position established. Eyes on the valley. The guard sniper. Ghost had nearly forgotten about her. They had dropped her on the eastern ridge an hour ago, a small figure disappearing into the darkness with her rifle case and equipment pack. He had not bothered to watch her set up. His team had Vance, the best sniper in the squadron. The guard sergeant was a checkbox on someone's joint operations requirement, nothing more. Copy, Overwatch. Maintain position. He switched channels and pushed her from his mind. There was work to do. The helicopter flared over the drop zone, and 12 operators spilled into the Afghan night. Ghost hit the ground and immediately began moving, his team flowing behind him in a formation they had rehearsed 1,000 times. No words needed. Hand signals and instinct. The valley stretched before them, a narrow corridor of rock and scrub brush leading to the target compound. Intelligence said the HVT was holed up with minimal security. 4 to 6 fighters. Standard extraction profile. They had done this dozens of times. Ghost felt the operational calm settle over him. The world narrowed to movement and terrain and the position of his men. This was where he belonged, not in briefing rooms or planning sessions. Here, in the darkness, where decisions happened in fractions of seconds and hesitation meant death. They covered the first kilometer without contact. The compound emerged from the darkness, a cluster of mud brick buildings huddled against the valley wall. No lights, no movement. Ghost raised his fist, and the team froze. Too quiet. The thought surfaced before he could suppress it. He had been in enough ambushes to recognize the absence of life. Dogs should be barking. Someone should be smoking near a doorway. The silence was wrong, but intelligence was solid. Multiple confirmations on the target location. Drone surveillance showing activity as recently as 6 hours ago. Ghost weighed his instincts against the mission parameters and made the call. Move to breach positions. The team flowed forward. For men to the primary entrance. 4 to the secondary. For providing security on the perimeter. Ghost positioned himself with the breach element. Rifle up, every sense straining against the darkness. Rodriguez placed the charge on the door. 3, 2, 1. The door blew inward, and Ghost was moving before the dust cleared. Room by room, corner by corner. The compound was empty. Not abandoned empty. Cleaned out empty. The kind of empty that meant someone had known they were coming. This is Vance. We have nothing. No target. No security. No evidence anyone has been here in days. Ghost felt the trap close around them half a second before the first RPG streaked from the tree line. The explosion threw him sideways. His shoulder hit the mud brick wall, and the world became noise and fire, and the screaming of men who had walked into a kill zone designed specifically for them. Muzzle flashes erupted from 3 elevated positions. Automatic weapons fire raked the compound from angles that left no cover. Contact. Multiple positions. North, west, and elevated south. Ghost grabbed Daniels and dragged him toward a rock formation outside the compound wall. Round snapped past his head. Another RPG impacted the building they had just cleared, collapsing the roof in a shower of debris. Vance was already returning fire, his rifle cracking in measured shots as he tried to suppress the nearest position. Ghost counted muzzle flashes. 20 plus. Maybe more. They were outnumbered, outpositioned, and caught in the open with nowhere to run. His radio crackled. Overwatch to actual. I count 11 hostiles across 3 positions. Northern ridge, western tree line, southern elevation. Do you want me to engage? The guard sniper. 2 kilometers away on a ridge. Ghost had forgotten she existed until this moment. Now her voice was the only thing standing between his team and annihilation. He did not hesitate. Overwatch, you're cleared hot. Engage all targets. Copy, actual. Engaging. Ghost pressed himself against the rocks and listened to his men fighting for their lives. Somewhere in the darkness, 2 kilometers away, a woman he had dismissed without a second thought was about to determine whether any of them would see sunrise. The first distant rifle crack echoed across the valley. Then another, and everything changed. The valley had become a killing field. Ghost pressed his back against the rock formation and tried to count the dead. Not his men, the enemy. The first distant rifle crack had dropped an RPG gunner mid-reload. The second took a machine gunner on the northern ridge. The third silenced a spotter who had been calling positions to the fighters below. 3 shots, 3 kills, from a range that should have been impossible. But impossible was not stopping the ambush. Rounds continued hammering their position from the western tree line. Ghost could hear Rodriguez returning fire somewhere to his left, the sharp bark of his rifle punctuated by the heavier thump of enemy PKM fire. Daniels lay against the rocks, clutching his side, where shrapnel had torn through his plate carrier. Alive but bleeding. Vance. Ghost keyed his radio. Vance, report. Setting up now. Actual. I have eyes on the western position. Give me 30 seconds. Ghost watched his sniper crawl into position behind a low wall. Vance was good. One of the best Ghost had ever worked with. If anyone could suppress that tree line, it was him. Vance settled behind his rifle. His eye found the scope. His finger moved to the trigger. The enemy round took him through the shoulder before he could fire. Vance went down hard, his rifle clattering against the rocks. Ghost heard the scream cut short as his sniper clamped his jaw against the pane. The shot had come from the southern elevation. Another sniper. They had overwatch of their own. Man down. Vance is hit. Ghost scrambled toward his fallen operator, keeping low as rounds snapped overhead. He grabbed Vance by his kit and dragged him behind the rock formation where Daniels lay bleeding. 2 wounded. No sniper capability. 20-plus enemy fighters in elevated positions with clear lines of fire on every escape route. Ghost ran the mathematics of survival and found no solution. He keyed the command frequency. Base, this is actual. We are pinned down in a kill zone. Multiple casualties. Requesting immediate QRF. The response came through static and gunfire. Actual, QRF is 45 minutes out. Repeat, for 5 minutes. Ghost closed his eyes for half a second. 45 minutes. His team would be dead in 10. Another distant rifle crack echoed across the valley. Ghost looked up in time to see a fighter on the northern ridge crumple and fall. Then another. The guard sniper was working, her shots coming every 8 to 10 seconds with mechanical precision. Overwatch to actual. The voice on the radio was calm. Unnervingly calm. I have neutralized the RPG teams on the northern ridge. Shifting to western tree line. Recommend you move your wounded to the depression 15 meters to your east. Better cover from the southern elevation. Ghost looked east. He had not noticed the depression in the terrain. She had. From 2 kilometers away, she was reading the battlefield better than he could from inside it. Copy, Overwatch. Moving now. He grabbed Rodriguez. Help me with Vance and Daniels. We are relocating east. They moved under fire, dragging their wounded across open ground while rounds kicked up dirt around their boots. Ghost waited for the bullet that would end him. It never came. Every time a fighter rose to take aim at the moving SEALs, the distant rifle spoke and the fighter dropped. They reached the depression, and Ghost finally understood what the guard sniper had seen. The angle of the terrain blocked the southern elevation completely. They had cover. Real cover. For the first time since the ambush began, his men could breathe. Another shot from the ridge. Another body falling on the western treeline. Ghost counted the remaining muzzle flashes. The enemy fire had slackened. Not stopped, but reduced. Where there had been 20-plus fighters raining death on his position, he now counted maybe 12. The guard sniper had cut their numbers nearly in half. Actual, this is Overwatch. Be advised, I have identified a flanking element moving through the southern drainage. For fighters attempting to close on your position. Ghost had not seen them. Would not have seen them until they were throwing grenades into his perimeter. Can you engage? Affirmative. 4 shots. Measured. Precise. Each one followed by silence from the southern drainage. Flanking element neutralized. You have approximately 15 minutes until QRF arrival. I will maintain Overwatch and continue to suppress enemy positions. Ghost leaned against the dirt wall of the depression and looked at his wounded men. Vance staring at the sky with glassy eyes. Daniels pressing a bandage against his side. Rodriguez reloading with hands that had finally stopped shaking. They were going to survive. Not because of anything Ghost had done. Not because of his planning or his tactics or his 15 years of special operations experience. They were going to survive because a National Guard sergeant 2 kilometers away was systematically dismantling an enemy force that should have killed them all. The distant rifle cracked again. Another fighter fell. Ghost thought about the briefing room. The unopened file. The laughter when she was introduced. He thought about Vance calling her a weekend warrior 12 hours ago, and now Vance lying in the dirt with a hole in his shoulder, while that same weekend warrior kept them all alive. He keyed his radio to the ridge position. Overwatch, actual. Good shooting. It was not enough. Not nearly enough. But it was all he could manage while his team bled, and a woman he had dismissed saved their lives one trigger pull at a time. Copy, actual. The calm voice came back. Just doing my job. Another shot. Another enemy down. Ghost closed his eyes and waited for extraction, listening to the sound of everything he thought he knew being proven wrong. Maya had seen the ambush coming 3 minutes before the first shot was fired. From her position on the eastern ridge, the thermal scope painted the valley in shades of white and gray. She watched the SEAL team flow toward the compound in perfect formation. Watched them stack on the doors. Watched them breach. And she watched the heat signatures in the treeline. The northern ridge. The southern elevation. Fighters who had been still as stone for the past hour, waiting. Overwatch to actual. She keyed her radio the moment she confirmed the threat. Be advised, I have multiple heat signatures in elevated positions surrounding the compound. Possible ambush. Recommend you abort approach. Static. Then Ghost's voice, clipped and dismissive. Copy, Overwatch. Maintain position. He had not listened. Had not even paused. Maya watched the SEALs breach the compound and disappear inside, and she knew with absolute certainty what was about to happen. The first RPG launched from the northern ridge. The explosion lit up her scope, and the valley erupted into chaos. Maya's breathing stayed steady. Her heart rate held at 62 beats per minute. Somewhere in that valley, men were dying, but panic was a luxury she had abandoned years ago. Panic made you miss. Panic got people killed. She began mapping targets. Northern Ridge. 3 fighters with RPGs. 2 with automatic weapons. 1 spotter with binoculars scanning for the source of any return fire. Western Treeline. 8 fighters in a staggered line. PKM machine gun anchoring the center. Riflemen on either flank providing suppressive fire. Southern elevation. 2-man sniper team. The greater threat. They would be looking for her the moment she revealed her position. Maya calculated distances. Northern Ridge, 1,800 meters. Western Treeline, 2,100. Southern Elevation, 1920. All within her effective range. All within the capabilities she had spent 15 years developing. The radio crackled. Overwatch, you are cleared hot. Engage all targets. Ghost voice. Desperate now. The dismissal gone. Copy, actual. Engaging. Maya settled behind her rifle. The M110 was an extension of her nervous system, a precision instrument that translated intention into action across distances most shooters could not comprehend. She had won 3 national championships with this weapon. She had killed 17 enemy combatants across 2 deployments. Tonight she would add to that number. First target, RPG gunner on the Northern Ridge, reloading for another shot. Wind from the east at 8 kilometers per hour. Range 1,812 meters. She adjusted her scope 2 clicks right, 1 click up. The trigger pull was a meditation. Smooth pressure. No yick. No anticipation. The rifle spoke and the round traveled for 2.3 seconds before finding its target. The RPG gunner dropped his weapon and collapsed. Maya was already shifting to her second target. Machine gunner on the Northern Ridge, sweeping fire toward the SEAL position. Same wind. Similar range. Scope adjustment minimal. Second shot. Second kill. The fighters did not know where the fire was coming from. 2 kilometers was beyond their comprehension. They scanned the valley, the compound, the immediate terrain. They never looked at the distant ridge, where a woman they would never see was ending their lives one trigger, pull at a time. Third target. The spotter with binoculars. He was the danger. If he identified her position, the Southern sniper team would have something to aim at. Maya fired. The spotter fell. His binoculars tumbled down the ridge and disappeared into the darkness. She worked through her target list with mechanical efficiency. Fourth kill. Fifth. Sixth. Each shot preceded by the same calculation. Wind. Distance. Elevation. Breathing cycle. The mathematics of death rendered in fractions of seconds. The enemy fire began to slacken. Fighters who had been pouring rounds into the kill zone suddenly found themselves exposed. They tried to reposition, tried to find cover. Every time one of them moved, Maya was waiting. Seventh kill. A fighter sprinting between positions. She led him by 2 body lengths and fired. He dropped mid-stride. 8 kills in 4 minutes. The ambush that should have annihilated a 12-man SEAL team was collapsing under the weight of precision she had carried to that ridge. Maya paused to reload. 20-round magazine. She had expended 9. 11 remaining. More than enough for what came next. Through her scope, she saw the SEALs moving. Ghost dragging wounded toward a depression in the terrain. Good. That position would protect them from the southern elevation. She had been about to call it in when he made the move himself. Then she saw the flanking element. For fighters moving through the southern drainage, using the terrain to mask their approach. They were 300 meters from the SEAL position and closing. Ghost had no idea they were coming. Actual, this is Overwatch. Be advised, I have identified a flanking element moving through the southern drainage. For fighters attempting to close on your position, can you engage? The range was 1,700 meters. The targets were moving through broken terrain with intermittent cover. Wind had shifted slightly, now gusting to 12 kilometers per hour. Affirmative. Maya exhaled slowly and found her first target. The point man, moving quickly between rocks. She tracked his movement, calculated his speed, identified the gap in cover where he would be exposed for exactly 1.3 seconds. She fired. He fell. The remaining 3 fighters scattered. One dove behind a boulder. One pressed himself against the drainage wall. One froze in the open, trying to identify the threat. Maya killed the frozen one first, then the one against the wall when he raised his head to look. The last fighter behind the boulder made his mistake 30 seconds later, breaking cover to run back the way he had come. Her fourth shot dropped him before he made it 10 meters. Flanking element neutralized. She reported it the same way she reported everything. Calm. Professional. The men in that valley did not need to hear emotion. They needed to hear competence. Maya settled back into her position and continued scanning for targets. The battle was not over. The Southern sniper team had not yet engaged her. They were waiting, watching, trying to identify her position from her muzzle flash. Let them watch. Let them wait. She had 17 confirmed kills across 3 deployments, and tonight she intended to add to that number until every fighter in this valley was dead or running. The SEALs in that depression had laughed when her name was announced, had called her a weekend warrior, had not bothered to read a single page of her file. None of that mattered now. The only thing that mattered was the rifle in her hands and the men she had sworn to protect. Maya, Chin exhaled and waited for her next target. Tommy Vance had been shot before. Fallujah, 2007. Through and through on his left thigh. He remembered the heat of it, the way his leg had buckled, the strange disconnect between knowing he was wounded and feeling the pain arrive seconds later. This was worse. The round had punched through his shoulder from the southern elevation, shattering his collarbone and exiting just below his neck. Rodriguez had packed the wound with gauze and injected him with morphine, but the drugs only dulled the edges. Every breath sent fire through his chest. Every heartbeat reminded him that he was lying in the dirt while his team fought for their lives. And he could not do a single thing about it. His rifle lay 3 meters away where it had fallen when he went down. Might as well have been 3 kilometers. His right arm was useless, the nerve damage making his fingers twitch and spasm without his control. He was a sniper who could not shoot, a protector who could not protect. The distant rifle cracked again, and Vance turned his head toward the sound. 2 kilometers east, the ridge where they had dropped the guard sniper before insertion. He had not thought about her since the helicopter lifted off, had not considered her relevant to the mission. She was a checkbox, a formality, a weekend warrior playing dress-up with the real operators. Another crack, another enemy body tumbling from the northern ridge. Vance watched a fighter in the western tree line rise to reposition his machine gun. The man made it 2 steps before the distant rifle spoke, and he crumpled like a puppet with cut strings. The shot had traveled for nearly 3 seconds. At that range, the bullet drop alone would be measured in meters. Wind drift would push the round sideways by the length of a man's body. She was making it look easy. The radio chatter filtered through Vance's earpiece. Ghost calling out targets. The guard sniper responding with calm confirmations. Then the shots. Always the shots. Each one followed by another enemy down. Western tree line, 2 fighters near the PKM. Ghost's voice was strained but controlled. Copy. Engaging. 2 cracks. 2 bodies. Vance closed his eyes and tried to calculate the shooting solution she was running. 2,000 meters. Crosswind gusting to 12 or 15 kilometers per hour. Targets moving through broken terrain. Elevation differential of at least 100 meters. These are shots he would have struggled with on his best day, from a stable position with time to prepare. She was making them in combat, under pressure, against an enemy that wanted her dead. He thought about the briefing room. The moment she walked in, and every eye in the room dropped to her National Guard patch. He remembered the smirk on his own face, the comment he had made loud enough for everyone to hear. Weekend warrior backup. The laughter that followed. She had said nothing, had not defended herself or cited her credentials or demanded respect. She had simply sat down and waited for the briefing to end. Now, Vance understood why. She did not need words. She had a rifle, movement in his peripheral vision. A fighter was crawling through the rocks toward their position, trying to close the distance for a grenade throw. Vance saw him, tried to shout a warning. The morphine made his voice come out slurred and weak. Before the words fully formed, the distant rifle cracked. The crawler went still. His arm flopped forward, the grenade rolling harmlessly from his dead fingers. She had seen him. From 2 kilometers away, through her scope, she had identified a threat that Vance could barely make out with his naked eyes. And she had eliminated it before anyone else even knew it existed. Rodriguez dropped into the depression beside him, breathing hard. "How are you doing, Vance?" Vance did not answer the question. Instead, he asked one of his own. "How many has she dropped?" Rodriguez glanced toward the eastern ridge. 11, maybe 12. Lost count after she took out that flanking element. 12 kills in less than 7 minutes. at an average range of nearly 2,000 meters. Vance had been a SEAL sniper for 6 years. He had deployments across 3 continents. He had kills at ranges that made other snipers shake their heads in disbelief. And he knew, with the absolute certainty of a man who understood his craft, that he was witnessing something extraordinary. The woman he had mocked was the best shooter he had ever seen in combat. Another crack from the ridge. Another enemy down. The fire from the Trilene had almost stopped now. The fighters who had sprung this ambush were dead, or dying, or running, picked apart by a single shooter they could not see and could not touch. Ghost's voice came over the radio. Obervach actual. Southern Sniper Team. Can you identify? Already engaged. Stand by. Vance heard 2 more shots, spaced 5 seconds apart. Precise. Deliberate. Southern elevation clear. Enemy sniper team neutralized. She had killed their sniper. The same sniper who had put Vance on his back with a round through his shoulder. She had found him, calculated the shot, and ended him while Vance lay in the dirt bleeding. The morphine was making everything soft and distant, but Vance held on to one thought with perfect clarity. When they got back to base, he owed that woman more than an apology. He owed her his life. He owed her the lives of every man in this depression. The distant rifle fell silent. The valley fell silent with it. QRF inbound. Ghost's voice carried a new tone. Relief. Gratitude. Exhaustion. 5 minutes out. They were going to survive. All 12 of them. Because a National Guard sergeant they had laughed at refused to let them die. Vance stared at the eastern ridge and waited for extraction, the weight of his own arrogance pressing harder than the wound in his shoulder. He had called her a weekend warrior. She had answered with 17 kills and 0 friendly casualties. There was nothing he could say to balance that scale. But when he got the chance, he was going to try. The Tactical Operations Center had gone quiet. Every screen, every operator, every eye in the room was fixed on the thermal feed from the Karengal Valley. Lieutenant Commander Sarah Reyes stood at the central console, watching 12 heat signatures huddle in a depression while enemy fighters surrounded them. She had seen ambushes before, had watched operations go wrong from the same room, helpless to do anything but coordinate and pray. This one should have been a massacre. It was not, and the reason was a single white dot on the eastern ridge, 2 kilometers from the kill zone. The thermal camera tracked Maya Chin's position as she fired. Reyes watched the muzzle flash bloom on the screen, a brief flare of heat that vanished almost instantly. 2 seconds later, an enemy signature on the northern ridge went dark. Confirmed kill. The analyst beside her updated the count on his tablet. That makes 14. 14 kills in 9 minutes. Reyes had spent 20 years in the Navy. She had worked with SEALs, Marine Scout snipers, Army Rangers. She had never seen shooting like this. The radio crackled with Ghost's voice, calling out another target. Western Trilene, fighter repositioning near the drainage. Maya's response came back flat and professional. Copy. Engaging. Another muzzle flash on the thermal feed. Another enemy signature going cold. 15, the analyst said. Reyes picked up the command phone. She had been dreading this call, but protocol demanded it. SOCOM needed to know that a joint operation had gone sideways. The voice on the other end was a captain she had briefed before. Reyes, what the hell is happening in that valley? Ambush, sir. SEAL team walked into a prepared kill zone. 20-plus enemy fighters in elevated positions. 2 friendly casualties, both stable. Silence on the line. Then the question she expected. What is your QRF status? 25 minutes out, sir. Reyes paused, watching another enemy signature disappear from the thermal feed. But we have effective fire support on station. From what asset? Sergeant First Class Maya Chun, Army National Guard. She is positioned on the eastern ridge, providing sniper overwatch. The silence stretched longer this time. Reyes could hear the captain processing the information. A guard sniper, providing fire support for a SEAL team in a kill zone. The words did not fit together in the way most special operations officers expected. Tell me about this, Sergeant. Reyes pulled up the file on her console. The file that Ghost Morrison had left unopened on the briefing room table. 3 deployments, sir. 2 Bronze Stars. She qualified expert on the M110 at Fort Benning with scores that are still posted in their record books. Before she enlisted, she won 3 consecutive national shooting championships in long-range precision rifle. The captain's voice changed. How many confirmed kills does she have right now? Reyes glanced at the analyst. 15, sir. 16. She watched another signature go dark. 17. Get her whatever she needs. Full drone support. Real-time intelligence. Whatever assets you have available, they go to that ridge. Copy, sir. Reyes ended the call and turned to her communications officer. Patch me through to Overwatch. Direct line. The connection took seconds. Overwatch, this is TOC Actual. You have full authorization from SOCOM. I am feeding you real-time drone intelligence on enemy positions. Check your tablet. Copy TOC. The calm voice came back. I have the feed. Seeing 3 remaining fighters in the western tree line, 2 in the southern rocks, 1 attempting to withdraw north. Reyes watched the thermal screen as Maya worked. The northern runner went down first, then the 2 in the southern rocks, taken with shots spaced 8 seconds apart. The western tree line fighters tried to scatter. 1 made it behind a boulder. The other did not. 20 kills, the analyst breathed. In under 12 minutes. Reyes did not respond. She was watching the ridge position, the small heat signature that had not moved more than a meter in either direction since the ambush began. Maya Chan was operating with a stillness that bordered on mechanical, her body perfectly controlled, her shots perfectly placed. This was not luck. This was not adrenaline. This was the product of 15 years of dedication to a craft that most people would never understand. The radio crackled again. TOC, Overwatch. I have movement in the Northern Valley. Possible reinforcements approaching from grid reference 47. Reyes checked the drone feed. Confirmed. 6 additional fighters moving toward the ambush site. They were still 3 kilometers out, but closing. Can you engage at that range? Affirmative. But I will need to relocate to maintain line of sight. Request permission to shift position 200 meters west. Granted. Keep me updated. The thermal signature on the ridge began to move. Slow. Deliberate. Maya was repositioning without breaking her sight picture, her rifle sweeping the terrain as she crawled to her new position. Reyes thought about the briefing that morning. The way Ghost had introduced Maya as an afterthought. The way Vance had smirked and called her a weekend warrior. The way every SEAL in that room had dismissed her without a second glance. They were alive because of her. Every single one of them. And when this operation was over, Reyes was going to make sure the entire chain of command knew exactly who had saved them. Overwatch in position. Maya's voice cut through the silence. I have eyes on the reinforcement element. 6 fighters. Range 3,200 meters. Engaging. The first shot dropped the point man. The second took the fighter beside him before he could react. By the 4th shot, the remaining fighters had scattered into the rocks, their advance broken before it began. Reyes watched the thermal feed and allowed herself a single moment of satisfaction. 24 kills, 1 shooter, 0 friendly fatalities. When the after-action report reached SOCOM, it was going to rewrite everything they thought they knew about who belonged in combat. Maya saw the glint before she understood what it meant. Parallel ridge, 800 meters south of her position. A flash of light that should not exist in the pre-dawn darkness. Glass reflecting starlight. A scope. They had found her. She shifted her rifle slowly, keeping her movements minimal. The enemy sniper team was setting up on a rocky outcrop with clear sight lines to her position. 2 men, one behind a rifle, the other spotting with a rangefinder. Professional positioning. Deliberate movements. These are not insurgents with stolen weapons. These are trained shooters who knew exactly what they were doing. Maya calculated her options in the space between heartbeats. She could relocate. 200 meters east would break their line of sight and give her cover to reposition. But relocating meant abandoning her overwatch of the valley. It meant leaving the SEALs without eyes for the 60 seconds it would take her to move. 60 seconds was enough time for the remaining fighters to regroup. Enough time for another flanking element to close on Ghost's position. Enough time for men who trusted her to die. She stayed. The enemy sniper was good. Maya could tell by the way he settled behind his rifle, the economy of his movements, the patience he displayed while his spotter fed him range data. Somewhere in his past, someone had taught him the craft. Americans, probably. Or Russians. The training signatures were similar at this level. Maya adjusted her position behind a low rock formation. Not much cover, but enough to break up her silhouette. The enemy sniper would be looking for her muzzle flash, trying to pinpoint the position that had killed 24 of his allies. He would be angry. Anger made shooters rush. She was not angry. She was math. Range to enemy sniper, 1,847 meters. Elevation differential, minus 12 meters. Wind from the east at 14 kilometers per hour, gusting to 18. The crosswind would push around nearly 2 meters left at that distance. She adjusted her scope. 3 clicks right, 1 click down. The enemy sniper fired first. The round cracked past her head and struck the rock formation 3 feet to her left. Stone fragments sprayed across her face. Something hot traced a line across her cheek. Blood began to trickle toward her jaw. Maya did not flinch, did not move, did not breathe. The enemy sniper had rushed his shot. Anger, just as she expected. His round had been close, but close only counted with grenades. He would be adjusting now, correcting for his miss, preparing to fire again. He would not get the chance. Maya found him in her scope. Center mass. The crosshairs settled on his chest just below the throat. She could see his hands moving on his rifle, making adjustments. His spotter was speaking rapidly, feeding corrections. She exhaled half a breath and held. The trigger pull was the same as it always was. Smooth, controlled. The rifle kicked against her shoulder, and the round began its journey across 1,800 meters of Afghan darkness. The enemy sniper jerked once and slumped over his rifle. His spotter scrambled backward, abandoning the rangefinder, reaching for a sidearm that would be useless at this distance. He made it to his feet and turned to run. Maya chambered another round. The spotter was moving now, a harder target, but he was panicking, running in a straight line instead of zigzagging, running toward cover that was still 30 meters away. She led him by 4 body lengths and fired. He dropped face first into the rocks and did not move again. Enemy sniper team neutralized. Maya reported it the same way she reported everything. Flat. Professional. The blood on her cheek could wait. The tremor in her hands could wait. Everything could wait except the mission. TOC responded immediately. Copy, Overwatch. Outstanding work. QRF is 10 minutes out. Maintain position. Maya wiped the blood from her face with the back of her hand. The cut was shallow. A fragment graze. It would scar, probably, a thin white line across her cheekbone that she would see every morning in the mirror. She had been a shooter for 15 years, had competed at the national level, had deployed twice before this night, but she had never engaged another sniper in combat, had never felt the crack of a round passing inches from her skull, had never known with absolute certainty that the next 3 seconds would determine whether she lived or died. Now she knew. The valley below had gone quiet. The enemy fighters were dead or scattered. The reinforcement element had broken and retreated after she dropped for their 6. The SEALs were holding in their depression, waiting for extraction. Maya scanned the terrain one more time, looking for movement, looking for threats, looking for anything that might endanger the men she had been sent to protect. Nothing. The battle was over. She allowed herself one moment of stillness. One breath that was not calculated for trigger control. One heartbeat that was not measured against a shot timer. The adrenaline she had been suppressing for the past 15 minutes began to surface, making her hands shake and her vision blur at the edges. She pushed it down. There would be time for that later. Time to process what had happened on this ridge. Time to understand that she had survived a counter-sniper engagement against a trained shooter who had every advantage except one. He had been angry. She had been precise. Precision won. Maya settled back into her position and waited for the helicopters. The cut on her cheek throbbed with each heartbeat. The blood was drying now, crusting against her skin. She would clean it later. Would get looked at by a medic. would add another scar to the collection she had gathered across 3 deployments. But first she would watch over those SEALs until the last one was loaded on a helicopter and gone. That was the job. That was why she was here. Not for recognition. Not for respect. Not to prove anything to men who had laughed at her in a briefing room. She was here because someone had to be. And tonight, that someone was her. The distant sound of rotors began to echo across the valley. Extraction inbound. Maya kept her eye to the scope and waited. The gunfire had stopped. Ghost Morrison pressed his back against the dirt wall of the depression and listened to the silence. Not the tense silence of a lull in combat. The heavy silence of a battle that was over. The kind of silence that settled over a battlefield when one side had been completely destroyed. He counted his men. 12 operators. All breathing. Vance and Daniels wounded, but stable. Rodriguez already working on Vance's shoulder, replacing the blood-soaked gauze with fresh bandages. The rest of his team crouched in firing positions, rifles trained on a tree lean that no longer held any threat. 20 minutes ago, they had been dead, caught in a kill zone with no extraction and no support. 20-plus enemy fighters in elevated positions pouring fire on their location. Ghost had run the numbers and found only one outcome. The numbers had been wrong. Overwatch to actual. The voice on the radio was the same as it had been since the first shot. Calm, steady, completely unshaken. Valley is clear. I count no remaining hostile activity. QRF is 5 minutes out. Ghost keyed his radio. Copy, Overwatch. He wanted to say more. Needed to say more. But the words would not form. What did you say to the person who had just saved your entire team? What did you say when that person was someone you had dismissed without a second thought? Rodriguez finished with Vance and moved to check on Daniels. Ghost watched his men work the familiar rhythms of post-combat care and try to process what had happened on this mountainside. The ambush had been perfect. Textbook well-shaped kill zone with interlocking fields of fire. Elevated positions that negated every tactical advantage his team possessed. Whoever had planned it understood how SEALs operated and had designed a trap specifically to destroy them. It should have worked. Instead, a single shooter on a ridge 2 kilometers away had dismantled the entire enemy force with surgical precision. Ghost had counted the shots, had listened to the distant rifle crack again and again while enemy fighters dropped around his position. 20 confirmed kills. Maybe more, at ranges that defied comprehension. He thought about the briefing room, the moment the mission coordinator had introduced their Overwatch support. Sergeant Chun from the Guard. The way every SEAL in the room had reacted to that National Guard patch. The smirks, the sidelong glances. Vance's comment about weekend warriors that had drawn laughter from half the team. Ghost had not laughed, but he had not corrected it either. Had not opened her file, had not acknowledged her as anything more than a checkbox on some bureaucrat's joint operations requirement. That checkbox had just killed more enemy fighters in 15 minutes than most snipers engaged in an entire deployment. Movement in the western tree lane. Ghost raised his rifle, finger moving to the trigger. 3 figures emerging from cover. Running. Not toward his position. Away from it. Away from the valley. Away from the ridge where the shooter waited. He keyed his radio. Overwatch. I have 3 runners heading northwest. Engaging. Negative. Actual. I have them. The calm voice did not waver. Save your ammunition. Ghost watched through his optic as the runners fled. One by one, they fell. 3 shots. 3 kills. At a range that was now pushing past 2,000 meters as they ran further from the valley. The distant rifle fell silent. Rodriguez appeared beside Ghost, his hands still bloody from treating the wounded. That is 23 confirmed kills. His voice was quiet, awed. In under 20 minutes, Ghost did not respond. He was still watching the ridge, still trying to reconcile what he had witnessed with what he had believed when he walked into that briefing room. The sound of rotors echoed across the valley. Extraction. Finally, Ghost rose from his position and began organizing the movement of his wounded. Vance first, shoulders still bleeding despite the fresh bandages. Then Daniels, moving under his own power, but clearly struggling. The helicopter touched down in a cloud of dust and debris. Ghost team loaded quickly, efficiently, the movements drilled into muscle memory across dozens of extractions. Within 90 seconds, every SEAL was aboard. The bird lifted off, banking hard toward the FOB. Ghost looked out the open door toward the eastern ridge. Somewhere up there, in the darkness, a woman he had never properly acknowledged was still lying behind her rifle. Still watching. Still protecting. The crew chief tapped his shoulder. Another bird is en route for the overwatch position. 5 minutes behind us. Ghost nodded. She would be extracted. She would return to base. And then he would have to face her. Would have to look her in the eye and acknowledge what had happened on this mountain. He did not know what he would say. Did not know if words existed that could bridge the gap between how he had treated her and what she had done for his team. But he would find them. He owed her that much. He owed her everything. The helicopter carried them toward safety, toward medical care, toward the inevitable debriefs and after-action reports. Ghost closed his eyes and let the engine noise wash over him. 23 confirmed kills. 0 friendly fatalities. 1 National Guard sergeant with a rifle and the skill to use it. The briefing room felt like a lifetime ago. The laughter, the dismissal, the unopened file, all of it meaningless now. The only thing that mattered was the woman on that ridge. The woman who had refused to let them die. Ghost opened his eyes and stared at the mountains falling away beneath the helicopter. Somewhere behind them, Maya Chun was packing up her rifle and preparing for extraction. He wondered if she was thinking about the briefing room too. Wondered if she was angry or bitter or satisfied. Probably none of those things, he realized. She was probably just doing her job, the same way she had done it for the past 20 minutes while his entire team depended on her. That was the worst part. She had not saved them to prove a point. She had saved them because it was what she was there to do. The helicopter banked toward the FOB, and Ghost began composing the words he would say when he finally faced her. None of them seemed adequate, but he would try anyway. It was the least he could do. The helicopters swept across the valley in formation, rotors beating the air into submission. Maya tracked them through her scope out of habit, confirming friendly markings before allowing herself to relax her trigger finger. QRF had arrived. The cavalry, 40 minutes late, but finally present. She watched the first bird touch down near the SEAL position, watched operators pour out to establish a perimeter while the wounded were loaded, watched Ghost standing at the edge of the rotor wash, directing his men with sharp hand signals. Even from 2 kilometers away, she could see the tension in his shoulders, the weight of what had almost happened pressing down on him. Maya maintained her position until the last SEAL was aboard. Until the helicopter lifted off and banked toward the FOB. Until the valley was empty of friendly forces and the only movement was the wind stirring dust across the rocks where enemy fighters lay dead. 26 confirmed kills. She had counted each one, had recorded each shot in a mental log she kept during every engagement. Range, wind, adjustment, result. The mathematics of combat reduced to a series of calculations that ended with bodies cooling in the Afghan darkness. The second helicopter appeared over the eastern ridgeline, navigation lights blinking against the pre-dawn sky. Her extraction. Maya began breaking down her position with the same methodical precision she had used to establish it hours ago. Rifle secured in its drag bag. Spent brass collected and pocketed. Equipment packed in reverse order of deployment. The bird touched down 50 meters from her position. She moved toward it at a crouch, the rotor wash tearing at her uniform and stinging the cut on her cheek. The crew chief reached down to help her aboard, and she saw something in his eyes that had not been there during insertion. Recognition. Respect. Word traveled fast on military frequencies. The helicopter lifted off before she had finished strapping in. Maya leaned against the bulkhead and closed her eyes. The adrenaline was fading now, leaving behind the bone-deep exhaustion that always followed combat. Her hands trembled against her rifle case. Her cheek throbbed where the rock fragments had cut her. She thought about the briefing room, the 12 SEALs who had looked at her National Guard patch and decided she was not worth their attention. The smirks, the laughter, The file that sat unopened on the table, while Ghost outlined an operation that nearly killed his entire team. She should feel vindicated, should feel satisfied that she had proven every one of them wrong. But satisfaction was not what filled her chest as the helicopter carried her toward the FOB. Just weariness, just the familiar emptiness that came after the shooting stopped and the bodies were counted. The crew chief passed her a canteen and a field dressing. "For your face," he shouted over the engine noise. "Medics will want to look at that when we land." Maya pressed the dressing against her cheek and felt the sting of antiseptic mixing with dried blood. The cut would scar, a thin line across her cheekbone that she would carry for the rest of her life. A reminder of the sniper who had missed by 3 feet, of the choice she had made to stay in position rather than relocate for safety. She did not regret it, could not regret it. The men in that valley had needed her, even if they had not known it, even if they would never have admitted it before tonight. The FOB appeared on the horizon, lights blazing against the darkness. Medical teams were already assembling on the tarmac. Stretchers for the wounded, officers waiting for debriefs. The controlled chaos of a mission gone wrong and somehow salvaged. The helicopter touched down and Maya gathered her equipment. She expected to step off the bird and disappear into the crowd. Expected to find her way to the debrief alone, just another supporting element in an operation that belonged to the SEALs. She did not expect to find 12 men waiting for her. They stood in a loose formation near the edge of the tarmac. Ghost at the front, Vance beside him, arm in a sling, face pale but standing. The rest of the team arrayed behind them, watching her step off the helicopter with expressions she had never seen directed at her before. Maya stopped. Her rifle case hung from her shoulder. The field dressing was still pressed against her cheek. She did not know what to say, did not know what they expected from her. Ghost stepped forward. 12 hours ago, he had barely acknowledged her existence, had introduced her as an afterthought, had not bothered to learn her name beyond a rank and unit designation on her file. Now he extended his hand. "Thank you." 2 words. Simple, direct. But Maya heard the weight behind them, heard the admission of failure and the acknowledgement of death, heard everything Ghost could not say in front of his men, but communicated through the grip of his hand and the steadiness of his gaze. She took his hand, shook it once. "Just doing my job, Chief." Ghost held her grip a moment longer than necessary. Then he released her hand and stepped back. The other SEALs moved forward, each one offering the same gesture. Handshakes and nods and quiet words of gratitude from men who had laughed at her name 12 hours ago. Vance was last. He stood before her with his wounded arm cradled against his chest, his face tight with pain and something else. Something that looked like shame. "I called you a weekend warrior." Maya met his eyes. She could have reminded him of the kill count. Could have pointed out that she had saved his life while he lay bleeding in the dirt. Could have made him feel the full weight of his arrogance. She did neither. "You were wrong." Vance nodded slowly. "Yeah, I was." He extended his good hand. Maya shook it, and just like that, it was over. The mockery, the dismissal, the assumption that her patch determined her worth. All of it erased by 26 kills and a handshake on a tarmac in Afghanistan. Maya gathered her equipment and walked toward the debrief. Behind her, 12 SEALs watched her go. Not as a checkbox, not as a weekend warrior, not as an afterthought, as the shooter who had saved their lives. The sun was beginning to rise over the mountains. A new day, a new reality. And somewhere in the Korangal Valley, 26 enemy fighters would never see another sunrise because a woman they had never seen had been waiting on a ridge with a rifle and the skill to use it. Maya did not look back. There was nothing left to prove. The rifle had spoken for her. It always did. The medical facility smelled like antiseptic and failure. Tommy Vance sat on the edge of his cot, shoulder wrapped in fresh bandages, staring at the wall across from him. The morphine had worn off hours ago. Now there was only the dull throb of damaged tissue and the sharper pain of memory. 26 kills. He had heard the final count during debrief. 26 enemy fighters eliminated by a single shooter at an average range of 1,900 meters. The numbers kept circling through his mind, impossible to dismiss, impossible to forget. He had been a SEAL sniper for 6 years, had trained at the best facilities in the world, had kills on 3 continents that other shooters studied in after-action reports. And he knew, with the certainty of a craftsman who understood his trade, that he could not have done what Maya Chun did on that ridge. Not even close. The door opened. Vance looked up, expecting a nurse or a doctor or one of his teammates checking in. Instead, Maya Chun stepped into the room. She looked different without her kit. Smaller somehow. The tactical gear and rifle case had added bulk that her frame did not naturally possess. Now she wore a clean uniform, her hair pulled back, a fresh bandage covering the cut on her cheek. She carried 2 cups of coffee. Figured you could use this. She held out one of the cups. Medical coffee is terrible, but it is still coffee. Vance took it with his good hand. Thanks. Maya sat in the chair beside his cot. Not too close. Not too far. The distance of someone who understood that wounded men needed space but also needed company. She sipped her coffee and said nothing. The silence stretched between them. Vance had rehearsed a dozen different conversations in his head since the tarmac. Apologies. Questions. Explanations for behavior that had no good explanation. None of it seemed adequate now that she was sitting 3 feet away. Why did you come? The words left his mouth before he could stop them. Maya looked at him over the rim of her cup. To check on the wounded. Rodriguez told me Daniels was awake. Figure I would stop by your room too. That is not what I meant. She set her coffee on the side table. I know. Vance shifted on the cot, his shoulders screaming in protest. On the tarmac. You said you were just doing your job. But that is not the whole answer, is it? Maya was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice carried a weight that had not been there before. Kandahar, 2019, my first deployment. We were providing support for an army convoy that got hit by an IED. I was on Overwatch, same as last night. Different ridge. Different valley. Same job. She paused. Vance waited. The convoy commander was a captain named Reeves. Good man. Solid leader. When my unit showed up for the briefing, he looked at our guard patches the same way your team looked at mine. Did not say anything, but he did not have to. We knew what he was thinking. What happened? The ambush came 2 hours into the patrol. Reeves took a round through his hip. Could not move. His men were pinned down trying to reach him. I had a shot on the machine gunner that had them suppressed, but my rules of engagement required confirmation from the convoy commander before I could engage. Maya's jaw tightened. I called for confirmation. Reeves was bleeding out in a ditch, trying to reach his radio. Took him 45 seconds to key the mic and give me clearance. By the time I dropped the gunner, 2 of his men were dead. Vance said nothing. There was nothing to say. After he got back to base, Reeves found me. He was on a stretcher, heading for surgery. He grabbed my arm and said 4 words. Thank you for staying. She picked up her coffee again. He died 3 days later. Infection from the wound. Never made it home. But those 4 words stuck with me. He thanked me for staying on that ridge, even though his own hesitation cost 2 of his men. Even though he had looked at my patch and assumed I was not worth his attention. Maya met Vance's eyes. That is why I stayed on the ridge last night. That is why I did not relocate when the enemy sniper found my position. Because Captain Reeves taught me that the people who underestimate you still deserve someone watching their back. Because the patches do not matter when rounds are flying. Because everyone deserves to go home. Vance felt the words settle into his chest. The shame he had carried since the briefing room deepened into something heavier. Something permanent. I have been a sniper for 6 years. He spoke slowly, choosing each word. I have trained with the best shooters in the world, and I have never seen anyone do what you did on that ridge. Maya shrugged. You would have done the same if you had been up there instead of me. No. Vance shook his head. I would not have. Not at those ranges. Not under that pressure. Not with an enemy sniper trying to kill me. He paused. You are better than me. It is not close. The admission cost him something. He could feel it leaving some piece of his identity that had been built on being the best shooter in the room. But the truth was the truth. Denying it would only compound the failure he had already committed. Maya was quiet for a moment. Then she stood. Get some rest, Vance. You have a long recovery ahead of you. She was halfway to the door when he spoke again. Chun. She turned. Why get back in the field? I want to train with you. Learn how you read wind at distance. How you stay calm when everything is falling apart. He met her eyes. If you'll have me. Maya studied him for a long moment. Then something shifted in her expression. Not quite a smile. Not quite forgiveness. Something closer to acceptance. Ask me again when that shoulder heals. She walked out of the room, leaving Vance alone with his coffee and his bandages and the weight of everything he had learned about himself in the past 24 hours. He had called her a weekend warrior. She had answered by saving his life and teaching him what a real shooter looked like. The coffee had gone cold. Vance drank it anyway. It tasted like penance. The after-action report glowed on Lieutenant Commander Sarah Reyes's screen, cursor blinking at the end of a sentence she had rewritten 4 times. At approximately 0247 hours, Sergeant First Class Maya Chun engaged hostile forces from Overwatch position at grid reference 7249-3318, neutralizing 26 enemy combatants over a period of 17 minutes, an average engagement distance of 1,900 meters. The words were accurate. They were also completely inadequate. Reyes leaned back in her chair and rubbed her eyes. She had been working on this report for 6 hours, pulling together drone footage, radio transcripts, thermal imaging data, and witness statements from every SEAL who had been in that valley. The evidence was overwhelming. The conclusion was inescapable, and the recommendation she was about to make would raise eyebrows at every level of command. She pulled up the medal citation template and began typing. For extraordinary heroism in combat against an armed enemy of the United States, Sergeant First Class Maya Chun distinguished herself through actions that directly saved the lives of 12 United States Navy personnel. Under sustained enemy fire and facing a trained counter-sniper element, Sergeant Chun maintained her position and systematically eliminated hostile threats at ranges exceeding 2,000 meters, demonstrating exceptional skill, composure, and dedication to duty. A knock at her door interrupted her concentration. Reyes looked up to find Ghost Morrison standing in the doorway, a folder in his hand. "Commander, do you have a minute?" Reyes gestured to the chair across from her desk. "What can I do for you, Chief?" Ghost sat down heavily. He looked exhausted, the kind of exhaustion that went deeper than missing sleep. He placed a folder on her desk. "I want to add a personal statement to the after-action report." Reyes raised an eyebrow. "That is not required for the commendation." "I know." Ghost met her eyes. "But it should be on record. What happened in that briefing room? How I treated her. How my entire team treated her. She deserves to have that acknowledged." Reyes opened the folder and scanned the handwritten statement inside. Ghost had detailed everything. The unopened personnel file. The dismissive introduction. The failure to correct Vance's weekend warrior comment. The assumption that a National Guard sniper was nothing more than a checkbox on a joint operations requirement. It was a confession, written in the precise handwriting of a man who had spent 15 years leading special operations teams and had never failed as completely as he had failed Maya Chun. "This is going to follow you," Reyes said quietly. "This kind of statement in an official record. It will be read by promotion boards, command selection committees, everyone who ever reviews your jacket." Ghost nodded. "I know. And you still want it included?" "She saved my team, Commander. Every single one of them. And she did it after I treated her like she did not exist." Ghost's voice was steady but heavy. "The least I can do is make sure the next Guard sniper who walks into a briefing room with SEALs gets their file read, gets introduced properly, gets treated like the professional they are." Reyes set the folder aside. She had served with a lot of operators over the years, had seen courage in combat more times than she could count. But this kind of courage, the willingness to admit failure and accept consequences, was rarer than any battlefield heroism. "I will include it," she said. Ghost nodded and stood to leave. At the door, he paused. "I heard Vance submitted a statement too." "He did." Reyes pulled up another document on her screen. Wrote it from the medical ward. 3 pages detailing every shot he heard from that ridge, every life she saved, and his own failure to recognize competence when it was standing right in front of him. Ghost was quiet for a moment. "Good." He walked out without another word. Reyes returned to her report. The medal recommendation was straightforward. Bronze Star at minimum. But the counter-sniper engagement changed the calculation. Maya had faced a trained shooter who had her position dialed in, had taken fire that missed her head by 3 feet, had stayed in position rather than relocate because the SEALs needed her eyes. That was not Bronze Star territory. That was Silver Star, possibly higher. Reyes began drafting the recommendation, adding Ghost's statement and Vance's statement to the supporting documentation. The package would go to SOCOM by end of day. From there, it would climb the chain, collecting signatures and approvals, until it reached whatever general officer had final authority over awards at this level. But Reyes was not finished. She opened a new document and began typing a separate recommendation. This one would go through different channels. Training command rather than awards and decorations. A proposal that had been forming in her mind since she watched Maya's muzzle flashes on the thermal feed. Sergeant First Class Maya Chen should be offered a position as instructor at the Joint Special Operations Sniper Course, Fort Bragg. Her demonstrated expertise in long-range precision shooting, combat stress management, and tactical decision-making under fire represents a significant training asset that should be leveraged across all special operations communities. Reyes added Maya's qualification scores, her competition records, her previous deployment evaluations. She attached the drone footage from the Karangal Valley showing shot placement and timing. She included the counter-sniper engagement data, the range calculations, the wind measurements. The package was comprehensive, overwhelming, the kind of recommendation that left no room for the usual bureaucratic hesitation. She sent both documents, the medal recommendation and the instructor proposal, to SOCOM with a single cover message. Please expedite. This soldier has earned our attention. The response came 47 hours later. Fastest approval Reyes had seen in her 20-year career. Silver Star confirmed. Instructor position approved. Orders to Fort Bragg, pending completion of current deployment. Reyes printed the confirmation and walked to the transient quarters where Maya was billeted. She found the sergeant cleaning her rifle, the same methodical precision she brought to everything. Sergeant Chen. Maya looked up. Commander. Reyes handed her the printed confirmation. Silver Star. And a new assignment. Training Command wants you at Fort Bragg. Sniper instructor for Joint Special Operations. Maya read the document slowly. Her expression did not change. When she finished, she set the paper aside and returned to cleaning her rifle. When do I report? 60 days. After your deployment rotation ends. Maya nodded. Understood. Reyes watched her for a moment. Most soldiers would have reacted to this news. Celebration. Surprise. Something. Maya simply acknowledged it and continued her work. You earned this, Sergeant. Everything in that package. Maya looked up again. Her eyes held something that might have been gratitude, buried deep beneath layers of professionalism and hard-won composure. Thank you, Commander, for reading my file. Reyes nodded once and left the room. Behind her, the sound of Maya's cleaning rod moving through the rifle barrel resumed its steady rhythm. The system had worked, Reyes thought as she walked back to her office. Slowly, reluctantly, but it had worked. Now, they just had to make sure it kept working for the next Maya Chen who came along. 3 months later, Maya Chen stood before a classroom of 24 special operations candidates and watched them pretend not to stare at the scar on her cheek. The room held SEALs, Rangers, Green Berets, and Marine Raiders. Men who had passed selection courses that broke 90% of applicants. Men who had seen combat on 4 continents. Men who had read about the Karangal Valley engagement in training materials distributed to every sniper school in the military. They knew who she was. They knew what she had done. And for the first time in her career, not a single one of them looked at her National Guard patch with anything less than respect. Good morning. Maya's voice carried across the room without effort. I am Sergeant First Class Chen. For the next 8 weeks, I will be teaching you how to shoot at distances that most of you currently consider impossible. She pulled up a slide showing wind drift calculations at 2,000 meters. The math was complex. The application was harder. By the end of this course, some of you will be able to make shots like the one shown on this slide. Some of you will not. The difference will not be talent or natural ability. It will be discipline, patience, and the willingness to trust the mathematics when every instinct tells you the shot will not connect. She spent the next 3 hours walking them through fundamentals they thought they already knew. Breathing cycles, trigger control, the mental framework required to stay calm when targets were shooting back. Most of them took notes. A few of them struggled to keep up. None of them questioned her expertise. After class, a young ranger approached her station while she was packing up her materials. He wore the same patch she did. National Guard. His name tape read Hernandez. Sergeant Chun, do you have a minute? Maya looked up. What do you need, specialist? Hernandez hesitated. He was young, early 20s. Probably his first selection course after years of drilling on weekends and deploying when called. I read about what happened in the Karangal Valley. How the SEAL team treated you before the mission. He paused. Does it get easier? The way people look at the patch? Maya set down her equipment bag. She studied the young soldier for a moment, seeing echoes of herself from a decade ago. Eager, talented, tired of being dismissed before being tested. No, it does not get easier. The looks do not stop. The assumptions do not go away. You will walk into a room for the rest of your career and have people decide who you are before you speak. Hernandez's face fell slightly. But here's what I have learned. Maya stepped closer. Competence is a language everyone understands eventually. You cannot argue someone into respecting you. You cannot explain your way past their prejudice. The only thing you can do is be so good at your job that they have no choice but to acknowledge it. She gestured to the classroom around them. Every operator in this room read about what happened on that ridge. They did not read about my guard patch or my weekend drills or any of the things people use to dismiss soldiers like us. They read about 26 confirmed kills at 1,900 meters average. They read about a counter-sniper engagement at 1,800 meters. They read about 12 SEALs who went home to their families because someone on a ridge refused to let them die. Maya met his eyes. Do the work. Master your craft. Let the results speak. Everything else is noise. Hernandez nodded slowly. The doubt in his expression had shifted to something harder, something more determined. Thank you, Sergeant. He walked out. Maya watched him go and wondered if she had said enough. Wondered if any words could truly prepare someone for the long road of proving themselves again and again to people who had already decided they were not worth the effort. Her phone buzzed. A message from Lieutenant Commander Reyes. Ghost Team is deploying again. They have specifically requested you for Overwatch support. Not as backup, as primary sniper element. Orders attached. Maya read the message twice. Then a third time. 3 months ago, Ghost Morrison had barely acknowledged her existence. Had introduced her as an afterthought. Had not bothered to open her personnel file. Now his team was requesting her by name. Requesting her as their primary shooter. The operator they trusted most to watch their backs. She thought about Captain Reeves, about the 4 words he had spoken from a stretcher before surgery. Thank you for staying. She thought about Vance in the medical ward, asking to train with her. About Ghost on the tarmac, extending his hand with 2 words that carried the weight of everything he could not say. The system was slow. The prejudice was real. The assumptions would never fully disappear. But things could change. People could learn. The distance between dismissal and respect could be closed 1 shot at a time. The ceremony happened the following week. Maya stood in her dress uniform before an assembly of special operations personnel, the silver star gleaming against her chest. Ghost presented the medal himself. The man who had barely nodded at her in a briefing room now stood at attention while the citation was read aloud. For extraordinary heroism in combat. 26 confirmed kills. Counter-sniper engagement under direct enemy fire. Actions directly responsible for saving the lives of 12 United States Navy personnel. The words echoed across the parade ground. Maya kept her eyes forward, her expression neutral. She had never done this for recognition. Had never needed medals or ceremonies to validate what she knew about herself. But standing there with Ghost at attention beside her and Vance in the crowd with his arms still in a sling, she understood that this moment was not really about her. It was about every soldier who would come after. Every guard member who would walk into a room full of active duty operators and see the doubt in their eyes. Every woman who would pick up a rifle and be told she did not belong. Every person who had ever been dismissed before being tested. The ceremony ended. Operators filed past to shake her hand. SEALs and Rangers and Green Berets, offering congratulations that would have been unthinkable 4 months ago. Maya accepted each one with the same quiet professionalism she brought to everything. That night, she returned to her quarters and found the mission folder waiting on her desk. Ghost Team. Next deployment. Her name listed first under sniper support. Not as the guard backup. Not as the weekend warrior. Not as the checkbox on someone's joint operations requirement. As the shooter they wanted watching over them. Maya opened the folder and began studying the terrain maps. New valley. New mission. Same job she had been doing for 15 years. Somewhere out there, someone was underestimating a soldier because of a patch or a gender or an assumption built on prejudice rather than performance. Somewhere out there, that soldier was preparing to prove them wrong the only way that mattered. With results. With excellence. With a rifle and the skill to use it. Everyone who's been watching this story knows what that feels like. You know what it means to be dismissed before you are tested. To have people decide who you are before you speak. If this story reminded you of someone who proved the doubters wrong, share it with them. And if you have been standing on your own ridge, waiting for your moment to show what you are capable of, keep going. Your time is coming. Maya closed the folder and began packing her kit. There was work to do. There was always work to do. And she would be ready when the call came.